The NES Classic Edition was a massive success. In 2016, Nintendo launched it out of necessity because they didn't really have anything else going on. The Wii U was dead. They put out like their last major title, Paper Mario Color Splash. That should show you how dead it was. They put that out in October, and then a little after that, they announced the Nintendo NX as the Nintendo Switch for a March 2017 release date. But in November of 2016, Nintendo launched the NES Classic Edition, and everybody needed to have it for some reason. Everybody wanted that classic system just because it was kind of cute, and for some reason they didn't know of any other ability to play NES games at that time. There's really no real reason to buy that other than it was a cool collectible, and for more casual players, it was like, oh man, I remember the NES. So, the hardcore kind of wanted it because it was a cool collectible, and the casuals wanted it because they didn't know of a different world being available at a moment's notice. But either way you slice it, it was only 60 bucks. That was a pretty damn good deal. I mean, it included 30 games, so that's $2 per game, while also being, a really cool miniature version of the NES with authentic NES controllers. That's a steal. But the NES Classic Edition made a lot of people think, like, man, what if other Nintendo systems get the Classic Edition treatment? I thought that myself in an earlier episode of Scott the Woz, where I went through and I thought of like, oh, what games would be included in an SNES Classic Edition, an N64 Classic Edition, a GameCube, Wii? And surely enough, in the summer of 2017, Nintendo announced the Super Nintendo Classic Edition, only a year after the NES Classic Edition released. It almost felt like they were planning this to be like a big line of systems. Just basically because they all have this logo on them, the Classics moniker. That made me feel like every single year going forward, we were gonna get a new Nintendo system in a miniature state with a bunch of games included. I remember there was a patent that was filed by Nintendo for a Game Boy-like device that a lot of people thought was going to be like a Game Boy Classic Edition. N64 would have obviously been like the next big system to do, but this was pretty much where they left it at, just NES and SNES. A little strange, Obviously, N64 is a little more powerful, but I think they could have done it. Game Boy, I think Game Boy would have been pretty easy to do in terms of, emulation of the games. Those games require, a peanut to run on. But I think you start running into issues when it comes to like, all right, well, how do you release that thing? Is it a plug and play thing, or is it a tiny little handheld device? Obviously, nowadays, I think they could do it because, they released the Game & Watch Super Mario Brothers Edition and the Game & Watch Legend of Zelda Edition, where, it shows that Nintendo can produce cheap but very high quality handheld devices with great screens, good controls, for an affordable price. That was only like 50 bones. But alas, 2016 to 2017 was pretty much the only time that Nintendo did these classic systems, and, they didn't last that long. This is something where you would have assumed that, this is a good idea to just kind of like keep this available, relatively, frequently. You can just walk into the store, it's like, hey, I want an SNES Classic Edition, I want an NES Classic Edition. That seems like a fun direction to go in when you have the Nintendo Switch, and that kind of covers your handheld and home console. Without a separate handheld like the 3DS, I thought it would have made sense to have Nintendo put out these classic systems where it's just like, what if you only want to play Nintendo 64 games? You remember playing that in college? You want to hook that back up again? Well, here's a solution with a bunch of games preloaded, good controllers, works with HDMI, all that jazz. I think that would have been pretty cool, but obviously, the way they're going in now works just fine enough. But if they would have kept up the classics line, I think a lot of people would be pretty happy. But at the very least, we got the Super Nintendo. This kind of took a lot of the criticisms aimed towards the original NES Classic Edition and improved upon them and made it just an overall better system. I wish they would have re-released the NES Classic Edition with these improvements in tow, but I digress. The Super Nintendo is considered one of the greatest systems of all time. Genuinely, like, it has like one of the best lineups. ever. Now, of course, I do think that is somewhat up for debate. I do think some game consoles have eclipsed the SNES in terms of quantity and quality. However, that doesn't mean the SNES isn't one of the greatest game consoles of all time with one of the greatest game catalogs of all time. I mean, this Classic Edition system is chock full of some of the all-time greats. But the SNES Classic Edition only has 20 games available on it compared to the NES Classic Edition's 30. And then it was also more expensive. This retailed for $80. NES Classic Edition was only $60, so $80 for 20 games, you know, $4 a game, I don't know. To put that into perspective, these SNES games would retail for about $8 a pop on the Wii, Wii U, and 3DS virtual consoles. So either way, you know, how much would that cost? You know, buying all these games on Wii U, double the amount, and you also get a cute little little guy right there. It's probably worth it. This box looks awesome. I mean, they genuinely recreated the original SNES boxes with the SNES and controllers getting a picture taken on some weird carpet. I love it. They did keep with the NES Classic Edition box aesthetic, even having that top header that says Super Nintendo Entertainment System. That's in the Nintendo Entertainment System font that you'd see on like later NES game releases. So that's interesting that they put that there, but you know, it does kind of match with the top. But that's more of an NES thing than a Super Nintendo thing. On the sides, we have all the information we have on the console, the controller. But on the back, this is where we get the meat and potatoes, alright? I have some things to say about this game lineup. Much like the NES Classic Edition, I kind of want to go through each and every one of the games included and just kind of point out which ones that I'm like, shouldn't have included that one, don't you think? The NES Classic Edition game lineup was quite damn good. I mean, most of the games there were like, oh, top 30 NES games. Like, these were the all-time greats, icons of that 8-bit NES era, or just video games in general. And the SNES has a lot to live up to here, so let's go through each and every one of these games and just kind of see, like, all right, does this belong on the SNES Classic Edition? Does this belong as a great representation of what the SNES was and everything that it stood for? Contra 3, The Alien Wars, a great inclusion. I mean, you have to have Contra 3. Donkey Kong Country, obviously. However, as you can see, we go right past Donkey Kong Country and into, you know, Earthbound, which means we don't have the other Donkey Kong Country games. There were 3 Donkey Kong Country games included on the Super Nintendo, and we only get 1, which I just find very weird. I'm just gonna write those down, even though they're not included, and on the NES game list, I wrote down the games that I thought were weird. I think it's weird that DKC 2 and 3 aren't included, especially considering DKC 2 is kind of the fan favorite of the bunch. Many people consider DKC 2 to be the best in the series. But the original Donkey Kong Country belongs on here. That was like the biggest game when it came out. Just the fact that it looked like that and it was also fun to boot. Like, so many games that were like these graphical showcases back in the 90s, they stunk. It was like, yeah, I want to look at virtual racing, but I don't want to play it. Donkey Kong Country still holds up today. In most ways, you know, I think it still has a couple little, like, oh man, growing pains. But it's an SNES classic. Oh, look at that. It belongs on here, but at the very least, I think DKC 2 should have been included as well. And it shouldn't have been as big of a problem because it is a Nintendo release, you know? It's a Nintendo-owned game. Even though it was developed by Rare, who's owned by Microsoft now, I don't really think there should be any issue with including Donkey Kong Country games, like, anywhere, you know? I don't know, there must be something they have to run by Rare before re-releasing Donkey Kong Country. It always seems to show up, like, later than other things. It showed up later on, like, the SNES Online service on Nintendo Switch Online. They waited a while to put it out on the Wii U Virtual Console. I don't know, but either way, like, I feel like there shouldn't have been a problem to put at least a DKC 2 here. But, you know, oh well. Earthbound, that's a big deal, including Final Fantasy 3, which is, you know, actually Final Fantasy 6, but they use the North American version because this is all about nostalgia. Yeah, I mean, 2 massive RPGs. 2 of the greatest RPGs from the 16-bit era. Well, not only the 16-bit era, but in general, just already, just right off the bat. Boom. F-Zero. Yeah. you have to include F-Zero. However, you know, I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm going to the P's, but it's a little weird that Pilot Wings isn't here. That was a launch title for the Super Nintendo right alongside F-Zero, and that's also like a fully Nintendo-owned, published, developed game. That's a little strange to me that that's not included on here. So because like there shouldn't have been any reason why it's not on here, but it just isn't. So I'm gonna put that there because Pilot Wings, you know, that's a classic game. It's harder than it looks. Like it's a much more technical game than you may think just immediately plugging it in. I'm like, I'm gonna play Pilot Wings, and then you immediately fail, and it's just like, oh damn. But yeah, Pilot Wings is another game that I'm kind of like, yeah, why wasn't that included? But yeah, next up is Kirby's Dream Course and Kirby Superstar. We got 2 Kirby games. Now, Dream Course may be kind of like the odd one out initially, but I feel like that was included because it is an amazing multiplayer game. And unlike the NES Classic Edition, Nintendo included 2 controllers in the box right here. I assume they did that mainly because the NES Classic Edition, you had to buy the second controller separately, which originally made sense because it was like, well, it's a second controller and you don't need it for every game. So obviously, hey, if you want to play multiplayer games, here, buy that extra controller somewhere. But it's like, you know, this isn't like a platform that you're gonna want to buy like accessories for, at least, you know, most people aren't. You kind of just want everything you need for this system to just be included in the box. So yeah, I feel like Nintendo was like, all right, we'll include 2 controllers. That way we don't have to worry about shipping, you know, second controllers. And, you know, just everything is just in one box. Just one box. We don't have to worry about accessories and whatnot. So, you know, hey, great multiplayer game to include. Maybe a little strange overall. I don't really think Kirby's Dream Course is really like one of the all-time great SNES games. So I'll begrudgingly put it in the list of like, why are you here? Not because I don't like its inclusion or don't understand it, but more so it's kind of the only one that I feel like you could kind of debate as to why are you here. But Kirby Superstar, there's no debate as to why that's here. I mean, that is often considered the best Kirby game, and that is like the go-to, like, bam, you want an amazing Kirby experience, Kirby Superstar. There's a bunch of other Kirby games they could have included. Kirby's Avalanche, which is just Puyo Puyo, or Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, so it's obvious why they didn't include that one, but I think it would have brought variety. There's not a lot of puzzle games on here. In fact, I don't really know how many of these could be considered puzzle games, so I'm gonna say there's really no puzzle games. Kirby's Dream Course, you might be able to consider a puzzle game, even though it's mini golf. Kind of a puzzle game in the sense of like a puzzle platformer. This is like a puzzle sports game, I guess. You know, Super Punch-Out you could kind of consider to be a puzzle sports game too, but yeah, there's not a lot of puzzle games, so I think it would have been cool if they would have done like Kirby's Avalanche. They just would have worked with Sega. Because they own Puyo Puyo right now. And Kirby's Avalanche is just kind of a reskin of Puyo Puyo, so, you know, that might have been kind of cool to include, so I'll put that there. Kirby's Dream Land 3 is the other Kirby game on SNES that wasn't included. It's not a bad game at all. It's a great Kirby game, but it's generally kind of like one of the more forgettable ones, and it's also kind of, you know, like just overshadowed by Superstar. Superstar is the one that, like, if you're including a Kirby platformer on the SNES Classic Edition, is going to be Kirby Superstar. But I think that just kind of shows, like, Nintendo wasn't really going for, like, oh, well, we can include that, so why not? They were genuinely like, we're going to include the best games possible. We aren't gonna put any fluff here, but it's just like Donkey Kong Country 2 isn't fluff. I wouldn't say like Pilot Wings is fluff, but I guess they were just like, no, we're going for the titans. We're going for the mainstays that everybody knows, everybody played, Kirby's Dream Course. Yeah, I feel like for the most part, yeah, this is pretty much like a titans list only, but that just kind of makes the inclusions of like weirder ones like Dream Course a little strange. Mega Man X, obviously, yeah, you got to include Mega Man X. They could have included stuff like maybe Mega Man 7 or Mega Man X2, X3, but Mega Man X was the Mega Man game that generation. It's just pretty interesting how like, Mega Man's place on the 16-bit consoles pretty much just peaked at X, and then you know, X2 and X3 came out, just didn't really get the same same response. Not bad games by any means, including Mega Man 7, you know, not a bad game, great games. But they just didn't get the same response as the original X did. So it's just like, yeah, you know, you could have included 7 or X2, but, you know, they included the one that mattered. Secret of Mana, you know, that's another one that I'm like, yeah, of course that should be here, but, you know, that's a Square Enix game, or Squaresoft at the time. And I think a lot of people were just kind of confused, like, you include Secret of Mana, but, no Chrono Trigger. I think Chrono Trigger just costs a lot of money to license, and Square's kind of picky with how it's re-released. Pretty much like the only place it was for a while was just PC and mobile, and the Wii Virtual Console, but that was pretty much it. So like, yeah, we get Final Fantasy 3 and we get Secret of Mana, which is, you know, a big, like a great game on the SNES. But it just kind of feels weird to have like these two, but no Chrono Trigger. The original Star Fox, obviously, the original Star Fox, it holds up a little better than I think some people give it credit for, but still doesn't hold up that great. However, again, you know, we're kind of going with like Titans on the SNES. Star Fox definitely fits that bill. Street Fighter 2 Turbo, of course, like you have the great fighting game wars with Street Fighter 2 versus Mortal Kombat. Obviously, Mortal Kombat wasn't included for obvious reasons. But to be fair, you could include like Mortal Kombat 1 because it doesn't include any blood. So it's just like including Mortal Kombat 1 would have been kind of a cute little like, hey, you know, here's something big from the time, but you know, I don't really think a lot of people would be like, oh yeah, Mortal Kombat is such a great inclusion here. I think it would be cool. I think that would be great from a historic perspective, but you know, if you were gonna include any fighting game, Street Fighter 2 Turbo, it just makes sense. Super Castlevania 4, another obvious pick. Super Ghouls and Ghosts though. Ghouls and Ghosts is like one of the easiest to like re-release things Capcom has. Like they'll just put it out on anything. It's on the NES online service. It's always there when it comes to like, oh, we got Capcom games on this whatever little cheap handheld thing made by Retrobit or something, or we have this cheap plug and play thing made by At Games, and we have Capcom games on it, and guess what's always there? Ghosts and Goblins. Ghouls and Ghosts was on the Sega Genesis Mini. Super Ghouls and Ghosts is on the SNES. I don't know why you'd include that, but not like, you know, any of these other games. So, you know, like, hey, it's not bad, but it's also like, it really only appeals to like Ghosts and Goblins fans, these games. You only really like it if you already like it. I don't really see many people going, it's just like, I never tried Super Ghouls and Ghosts, but I tried it on the SNES Classic Edition. Wow, I finally found my next favorite game. It's not bad, but it's just, you know, like, I don't really see it as one of the all-time greats on the SNES Classic Edition. Next up is Super Mario Kart. That is one that you have to include. Mario RPG, that's a big one that they got, obviously because Square was on board with this and Square developed Mario RPG, so that was always kind of like a rights issue because Square does own like some of the things in Mario RPG, so you know, that's always a bit trickier to re-release it. It has been re-released consistently, but you know, just the fact that, you know, it's something that Square and Nintendo kind of have to work out does make it a little slower to re-release than other games. But Super Mario World, you know, Super Mario World. Super Metroid, it's Super Metroid. Super Punch-Out, you know, it might be one I can put down here. I'd put it down here begrudgingly, not because I want to, but more so, you know, if you're not going to include some games, you know, Super Punch-Out may be a questionable one to include. You know, I really like Super Punch-Out, but it is generally one of the least popular Punch-Out games. Not that it's bad, but more so just that it's not as popular as the original Punch-Out. But we also have A Link to the Past and Yoshi's Island. You know, what can I really say about those games other than they belong here? But that's not all. Star Fox 2. As a bonus game, it's a bonus game. It's not included with the rest of these because it never officially released. Star Fox 2 was kind of an infamous game for being canceled basically when it was already done. They advertised it in like Nintendo Power and showed it at trade shows, all that stuff. It was just releasing a little too close to the Nintendo 64's launch, and Nintendo just thought like, hey, you know, this doesn't make much sense. This just kind of looks pathetic in comparison to what we're working on, so let's just shelve it and, you know, never release it. Until then. So Star Fox 2 was available online before this. Like, builds leaked out, you know, like you could play Star Fox 2 by just downloading a ROM of it online. But this was the first time it was ever officially released by Nintendo, meaning like this game that was shelved, canceled, all of that, finally got an official release. It wasn't an oddity anymore. It finally came out, which was amazing. You know, sure, you could play it before then. You could play it on a cart, you know, like people would make reproduction carts of Star Fox 2, just kind of putting that leaked build on a cart and playing it. But of course, those builds were unfinished, and you know, Nintendo put out this build, meaning, you know, hey, this is the completed Star Fox 2, not meaning like there was new content in it, but more so like they had to clean it up a little bit. They had to, right? I don't actually know if they did or not, but I do know that like the builds that leaked out that fans put online, you know, those were a little unfinished. You know, they might have been very close to completion, but hey, this one, official release, boom, finished. I think by finish, I mean like bugs, like polish. Bugs were cleaned out and stuff. Either way, I've been spending too much time on that one. Star Fox 2 was only available after completing the first stage of Star Fox. Sure, I guess they did that to kind of give it that greater, like, oh, elusive game feeling, like, oh, I don't have Star Fox 2 yet, I gotta get Star Fox 2, and then when you get it, like, it has this big present unwrap animation and all of that. It's really cool. But yeah, only 3 games a part of this list where I'm kind of like, their inclusion is questionable. But not even like, I don't like them here. It's just more so like if I had to pick 3 games that's inclusion was questionable, these are my 3 games that I'd say, yeah, that's kind of weird. I think there's a little more missing from the SNES Classic Edition than there is weird inclusions, like, you know, these games, Chrono Trigger, even stuff like, I don't know, like Final Fight, Gradius 3, SimCity, games that in some cases, you know, I understand why they're not there. You know, SimCity, you need like the license for SimCity. Kirby's Avalanche, I get that. But, you know, just games where there are some missing things on here, but that shouldn't take away from the overall list. This is one of the highest quality lists of games ever put together. Like, one of the greatest compilations, one of the greatest like lineups on a plug and play system, on a game compilation, whatever you want to call this. This is outstanding. And the fact that you also get an unreleased game on top of that, it's just the cherry on top. So yeah, the SNES Classic Edition was a big deal. And similar to the NES Classic Edition, there were some accessories that released with it. Yeah, they did another book. So the NES Classic Edition launched with Playing with Power. SNES Classic Edition launched with Playing with Superpower. And this is similarly kind of like the special edition hardcover variant. And they wanted to keep with the cartridge aesthetic of the Playing with Power book, and this one they had to kind of tweak a little bit. So it comes with a slip cover like this, and you pull it out, and there we go. It's an SNES cartridge. That's pretty slick. I like it. And this book overall is a huge step up from the Playing with Power book. This book pretty much did more of like what I wanted the NES Classic Edition book to be. This focuses much more on just being a fun read rather than a collection of strategy guides. As you can see, they have like fan art here. Like they genuinely just have fan art that they collected. They have Nintendo Power scans right here, and they have more just passages written for all these things. And look at that, they have pictures of like original concept, proofs of concept that Nintendo put together for this thing. They have development sketches, look, oh man. And then they also just have like, oh, look at this, the Q&A that they had in like Nintendo Power, just showing like, hey, you know, like what you need to know about the next system. And then they also have just like, hey, graphics comparisons of like how NES games look compared to the Super Nintendo versions. And then they also, they don't even focus entirely on Super Nintendo. They say like, hey, these are the specs from like all these other Nintendo systems. And they have like accessories, controllers, the SNES mouse, and they have the Super Scope, and like look at all this stuff where like this is just so much more compelling than that original NES book. Not that the original NES book was bad, but it just kind of felt like a compilation of old Nintendo Power strategy guides. This feels like a true celebration of the SNES and Nintendo's lineage, while also focusing on giving tips and tricks when it comes to some of the games included with the SNES Classic Edition. Similar to the Playing with Power book, they pretty much only focus on like the Nintendo published games that were included with the SNES Classic Edition. So, you know, you have Star Fox 2, Star Fox, Punch-Out, Metroid, Link to the Past, all the Mario stuff, Donkey Kong. But outside of that, you know, we don't get strategy guides for like Contra 3 or Final Fantasy 3. But, you know, the Super Mario World section, they talk about the development. They show the release dates. They show all these scans from Nintendo Power. And then they also say like, hey, here's some stuff about how to control the game. Here's some secret levels and here's some maps and all that stuff. But it feels much more like an art book. It feels more like a coffee table book. And that's what's so nice about it. Just this big page just showing the power-up cycle for Mario is just great. They also showed this, like, a screenshot from the Super Mario Brothers movie. And they have the maps here. But just the way this is laid out, I vastly prefer to the Playing with Power book. This is an excellent little flip through, and it was definitely a great companion piece to the SNES Classic Edition, but it also works on its own. I think this is a great little celebration of the Super Nintendo, and it's also awesome that, you know, it was officially licensed by Nintendo. Nintendo put their blessing on this book. This is officially licensed by them, and I think this is amazing, especially because there's even a section in the back where, you know, they have little fan art and they show things that fans have done. That's incredible. It is a great book. And it shows just how much, like, not only was the SNES Classic Edition an upgrade from the NES Classic Edition, but the damn book was too. Here it is, the SNES Classic Edition. It feels a little more elegant than the NES Classic Edition. It feels sturdier. It feels like they put a lot more into making sure the build of this system just feels rock solid. And it also looks more like the original SNES compared to the NES Classic Edition looking like the NES. That's probably because, you know, the controller ports, like, what? These just look like the regular controller ports. Nothing to worry here. Yeah, you gotta open these, open these up here. Just hold up one moment. It'll happen. It'll happen. Oh. There it is. Yeah, so the controller ports are hidden by this little flap. You know, it does make this look more like an original SNES, but it does make it a little less user-friendly to just be able to, you know, plug it in. But it does still use the Wii Nunchuck port, the Wii Classic Controller port, whatever you want to call it. So that means, you know, like it fits in there, snaps right in there, all great. But that also means you can use this with Wii remotes, which is awesome. There's actually a Super Famicom controller for the Japanese Club Nintendo loyalty program, and I actually have that. You know, I imported it, and it was really cool. But this is pretty much the exact same deal, where you can play, you know, Super Nintendo games or just any games that uses just these buttons in games that support the Wii Classic controller. It's great, and this controller feels amazing. It's not one-to-one with the original, though. It uses like a different texture, like a grittier kind of like very light sandpaper texture. Not really sandpaper, but that's kind of the best way I can describe it. It's not rough at all, but it's definitely different compared to the regular SNES controller. But that's not a bad thing. I think it honestly feels better. That may be because it's newer, but you know, I don't know. But it feels great. This is one of the best controllers. It feels so nice in the hands. All the buttons are easily available to you, and they just feel good. And you get two of them. And thankfully, it's slightly longer. The NES Classic Edition had the big problem of the controller length, the controller cord length being as short as it was. And the SNES Classic Edition isn't much longer, but it is longer. Yeah, so good for you, Nintendo. But you know, it's still not great. Does the job though, it's fine. But what it all comes down to is plugging this in and the user experience. It is incredible. Pretty much very similar deal to the NES Classic Edition. It even uses like the same melody for the menu music, but this time, you know, it's SNES themed. It has the sound font from the Super Nintendo. It is so catchy. It is so fun. I love Nintendo creating new music based on their old systems. Even something like the Super Mario Maker music, when they have to create new music based on those old Mario games. It's so cool to look back at that and be like, oh, this song wasn't in Super Mario World, but we gotta make it sound like it was from Super Mario World. And it's similar to what they did with the SNES Classic Edition. Like, the menu music sounds ripped right from an SNES game, and it just has that classic Nintendo feel, but, you know, it was made by modern Nintendo, which is incredible. The games play beautifully on here. Like, SNES games clean up incredibly, and it just looks outstanding in HDMI. And they also give you more visual options. You have wallpapers now, which I used to not be a fan of, but I use wallpapers more often when I'm playing retro games. I don't know why. I don't like doing the stretching the 4:3 image to widescreen or doing any of the other options other than just straight 4:3 video with these games. But yeah, I mean, like, they have extra wallpapers. There's a really cool one which kind of shifts the color. It's very subtle, but it looks really cool. I really like it. But yeah, you know, like I oftentimes would just play like 4:3 games with the black bars, but I do like that you have the option to use wallpapers now. You still have all the features like save states by, you know, resetting the game and, you know, saving the state right there, but you also have rewind functionality, which I often forget about on this thing. So a lot of classic game compilations, re-releases, all of that, they feature this now where you can, you know, rewind just a little bit back to maybe, you know, like save your ass when you're falling down a pit, or just make a small mistake here and there. You know, I don't like to abuse it, but it is a good feature to have. And the SNES Classic Edition does have it. It's a little weird and clunky though, and that's mainly because this controller doesn't have all the buttons that, you know, like you can really use. You know, you can't just use the L button to rewind your classic game because, you know, a lot of games use the L button, so it's kind of hard for them to do that with just a simple button press. So it has to do with, you know, resetting, you know, going through the save state, and it'll pretty much let you rewind from the place that you left off with that save state. It works, it's easy to forget, and it's also just a little clunky to use. But hey, you know, it's a feature that's there. If you want it, good for it. But the all-winners game lineup and all the features they have, including wallpapers and screen settings like a CRT filter, pixel perfect mode, all of that, the amazing menu setup, and just everything the SNES Classic Edition offers, including improving upon everything the NES Classic Edition did, including 2 controllers in the box, longer cords. This may be one of the greatest mini consoles ever released, which isn't saying much. But yeah, it's great to see that Nintendo did improve upon the NES Classic Edition, but nothing much after this. This was pretty much all they did, NES and SNES Classic Edition. And you know what? Like, hey, 2 for 2. Like, some of the best mini consoles in the biz. But why did I wish they do more of them? I'm only gonna play this thing for like a day! I think when you really love a system, it's just really cool to get this, like, celebration of all of its greatest accomplishments, you know, and that's what the SNES Classic Edition is. And I think that's what makes it kind of lame when a mini console is, you know, kind of just farted out, just kind of made mediocrely. That's a word. And for one of the greatest systems of all time, it got one of the greatest mini consoles of all time. This is outstanding and a wonderful celebration of everything the SNES was, which doesn't include Donkey Kong Country 3.